Well, let me welcome everyone. I'm Paula Dobriansky. I'm going to turn it over to Jacqueline, who you will introduce yourself, who you are, and she's going to introduce our very distinguished guest speaker for this afternoon, who we're delighted is here today. And welcome back to the Kennedy School.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Future of Diplomacy Project's event on Russia and the Future of Nuclear Security, a conversation with Ambassador Bonnie Jenkins. My name is Jacqueline White Menchaca. I'm a Master's of Public Policy student here at the Kennedy School, my second year. I'm also a Belfer Fellow and a U.S. Department of State Wrangel Fellow, so it's such an honor to be with such a prestigious panel today. Before we get started, I'm just going to cover some basic house rules for our guests in person and also virtually. If you're on Zoom, please feel free to type any questions you may have in the Q&A box. Also be aware that this session is being recorded, so your image may appear in the recording and we may post it to the Belfer website. While this event is on the record, the event organizers prohibit any attendees, including journalists, from audiovisual recording or distributing parts or all of the event without written or express permission to do so. So with that said, it's my pleasure to welcome Ambassador Bonnie Jenkins, the Undersecretary for Arms Control and International Security from the U.S. State Department here at the Kennedy School. And I'll just give some brief words on her very, very, very phenomenal background. It was sort of difficult to pick what I wanted to say about you because you're quite an accomplished person. But Ambassador Jenkins has served as the Undersecretary for Arms Control and International Security since July 22nd, 2021. Previously, she served under the Obama administration as Special Envoy and Coordinator for Threat Reductions Program in the Bureau of International Security Non-Proliferation from 2009 until 2017. Ambassador Jenkins also coordinated U.S. efforts on threat reduction globally and U.S. government programs in chemical, biological, nuclear, and radiological security. She was the State Department lead for all 4 nuclear security summits held from 2010 to 2016, as well as a U.S. representative to the G7 Global Partnership Against the Spread of Weapons and Materials of Mass Destruction. So before serving as a coordinator, she was also a legal advisor to the U.S. Arms Control and Disarmament Agency. She is also a veteran, has 5 degrees, which is really very incredible as someone who just suffered through my own thesis to get a 2nd degree. And of course, she's a Belfer alum. So with that, I want to toss it over to Ambassador Dobriansky, who will be co-moderating the event today.
Warm welcome. And as Jacqueline said, the 2 of us are going to co-moderate. So I'm going to begin off with the first question. And by the way, we're just going to do a few questions to us, and then we're going to go to the audience to have it more interactive. So the first question I want to ask you is about Russia and what's been in the news. The fact that there were some reports that, well, the Russians were saying that they were going to be deploying tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus. Do you have some evidence that that is indeed the case? And if so, what leverage do we have to actually prevent Putin from going ahead and doing that? And welcome to you.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for the wonderful introduction. Looking forward to this. I'm so glad you started with questions because I had some talking points and I don't have to use those.
No, we like it and they're interactive.
That's right.
I had the chance to hear you earlier and you're terrific.
Thank you.
So
Thank you.
Good.
Always great to be back in Belfer. So yes, the statement about Russia putting weapons in Belarus, obviously very irresponsible. It only heightens concerns of countries about the whole nuclear weapons issue regarding Russia and Ukraine. And so, the fact that they're wanting to do this and Lukashenko's role in this, of course, is pretty important in terms of just raising the concern that countries have in this. In terms of what can be done to prevent that, it's very challenging to try to prevent the movement of Russia's keeping ownership of the weapons. We are making sure that the international community condemns and makes sure the international community is very clear about its concerns about the movement of that. But short of that, it's just really just making sure that Russia is aware of our concerns and the irresponsible actions.
But to date, there isn't evidence showing that there was movement yet.
I don't have necessarily any evidence of that, but I'm not going to rule out that anyone doesn't.
All right, let me pass, Jacqueline, to you.
With Russia pulling out of the New START program, what's the U.S. response to creating more stable arms control, and how do we work with Russia in light of violations that the U.S. has accused them of, recognizing that we still have to work with them in this sort of situation we're in?
Yeah, so the Russian decision to suspend, let's go step back a little bit more. So earlier this year, we had notified Congress that Russia was not doing two things they needed to do with the treaty. One was to have inspections, and the other one was to hold meetings with the bilateral consultative commission of the New START treaty. So they hadn't really agreed to doing those things. So that started as a problem. And then recently, as you know, Russia has decided to suspend the treaty. We have done a legal review of that, and in our legal analysis, that is not valid. It's not valid legally to say they suspend. So in our interpretations, Russia is still obligated under the treaty, and the U.S. continues to abide by its obligations. One of the other problems that's happened is because of Russia's suspension, they've decided not to provide notifications to us under the treaty. After we were informed by them that they certainly were not doing this, then we, as a countermeasure and also as a way to try to convince them to come back into the treaty, we decided that we would not reciprocate with ours as well. So currently, we are in a situation where Russia can get back into what we would call non-breach of the treaty by actually providing notifications, allowing inspections for the treaty to go forward, and to meet with us on the bilateral consultative commission, or the BCC. So that still remains. Now, Russia has said it's going to remain within the limits of the New START treaty, which is a positive thing. So that's where we are now.
Right. Well, let's go to China. The U.S. has tried hard to get China into these negotiations, and the Chinese have resisted. Could you speak to that issue, where you see it now, and what are the prospects for bringing them into, if you will? I mean, we know where the Russians are in the New START treaty, but the goal was to bring the Chinese in. Where are we on that?
Well, just to start out, we are concerned about the lack of transparency with the PRC. We know that they're building up their military capabilities. We know they're building up their nuclear capabilities. And obviously, one of the reasons why we want to engage them is to try to prevent any misinterpretation, any miscalculation between our countries and with any other country, because it's very opaque what they're doing. So we have reached out to them on several occasions to engage with us bilaterally. And we haven't really, we've been calling them, crisis management, risk reduction conversations. And so far, as you have noted, we have not had success in engaging them bilaterally. Just to clarify, I know that in the previous administration, there was an attempt to bring the PRC into bilateral discussions that we were having with Russia, which the Russians pushed hard against. They did not want to engage China on coming on board in a kind of a trilateral discussion. In this administration, we have not been trying to do that. We are, we see New START as continuing to be bilateral, but we've also, as I said, been trying to engage the PRC bilaterally as well, we have not been successful to date. We continue to make that effort because we think it's very important that there is less opaqueness on the Russian other PRC programs.
So to be clear, then it's two tracks. The goal for this administration is one would be with Russia, dealing with Russia, and the other one would be just dealing with China. Hypothetically, I mean, it's where it is right now. It's where it is, but that would be the goal. They'd be separate.
Right, the Russia will continue as it has been for years, bilaterally with them. And as you said, separately, we're trying to use the PRC.
And it is where it is now,
Mhm,
all right?
mhm.
Jacqueline, back over to you.
So 2 months ago at The Hague, you provided a 12 point kind of non-legally binding norm plan. And I'm just curious if you could kind of discuss how this is going to support governing military use of artificial intelligence. You emphasized we have an obligation to create strong norms, and we're responsible for the behavior concerning military uses of AI. So what are the prominent challenges in the US, sort of creating policy around this particular challenge with artificial intelligence, and how are we working with other governments to craft policies towards this technology?
And Madam Secretary, before you answer that question, let me just cue everybody. We're going to go to you. Like I said, we wanted to make this interactive, so we've asked 4 questions, so be thinking of it. We're in a good setting here that's intimate, and so we're looking forward to your questions.
Great, thanks. Once again, let's take a step back and look at the landscape. So, as we were just talking about arms control treaties, and as we all know, those are legally binding agreements that have to go to the Senate for advice and consent. And then, as I said, we are legally bound as well as other countries who are part of that treaty. And normally we have verification measures in which we are implemented to verify that each country is actually living up to the obligations that's set forth in the treaty itself. One of the things that we're seeing now is, as we're seeing new types of technology being introduced in emerging technology. So whether you're talking about AI or quantum or biotechnology or any of these other new types of technologies, they pose different challenges. And as a result, the way in which we address them are also not necessarily going to be traditional way of looking at establishing rules of the road or international predictability. So when we talk about AI, just an example, or we talk about quantum, one of the things that we're seeing, of course, is there's a lot more entities involved. These are obviously not just countries. There's a lot of industry involved in these issues. We see that emerging technology is going really fast. It's growing faster and at a rate that is challenging because a lot more countries and entities are being involved in them. There's a lot of dual use aspects to a lot of this technology. And so they don't lend themselves in many ways to traditional arms control. We have to find other ways that what arms control does do, in addition to limiting certain types of military weapons, other kind of weapons, they actually also provide some stability in the international community and predictability. We still want that kind of predictability and stability, but in this new world with these new type of technologies, we have to find other ways of dealing with it. And so one of the things that we're doing is trying to establish rules of responsibility, norms of responsible behavior in the development of these technologies. And the goal would be to get countries and in many ways also industries to sign up to these kind of rules of responsible behavior, because right now there are no guardrails. There's nothing out there to say how, what should be done. What about equity, issues of equity? What should countries, what should companies be thinking about when they develop these kind of technologies? And of course, there's a lot of positive that we get from these, even in AI and the military. For example, militaries are starting to look at how AI can be used in a positive way in their military applications. At the same time, we want to make sure that there are at least some rules of the road, something that will help countries think about what they should be doing when they're developing these kind of technologies or application in the military. So what we did in February at a conference in the Netherlands, there was a conference on AI in the military, and what the U.S. Produced for that event is a declaration on AI, AI in the military, use of AI in the military. And what it consists of is is there's several parts to it where things that countries should be thinking about in terms of application of military and military. And what we're doing is we're socializing that with a number of countries to get them to also sign up to that in terms of just things that they will also consider when they're getting into using AI in the military. So this is a way that we want to approach a number of emerging technologies that are just out there being developed very rapidly with a lot of countries, a lot of industry, and there aren't really any guardrails. And I use guardrails not in the sense of preventing them from doing the work, but just what should they be thinking about when they're developing these things?
All right, well, great. Thank you for that. All right, let's open it up for questions, comments. Yes, and if you don't mind, please introduce yourself. And we're switching.
Hi there, my name is JJ Hankin. I'm a Master's of Public Policy student here, second year along with Jacqueline. And it looks like, thank you for being here. It looks like there's not a lot of hope at the moment for any start of negotiations to build on to New START when it ends in 2026. And you just talked about AI, cyber capabilities, and beyond that, there are space assets, space capabilities that all increase the risk of entanglement between conventional forces and nuclear forces. And people that I talk to in the arms control world would really like to address that issue of entanglement so that there are some guardrails, like you mentioned, to prevent conventional conflict from escalating into nuclear conflict. In your mind, do you imagine that future arms control agreements will be comprehensive in trying to address that issue? Or do you think it's more prudent to have separate agreements for things like nuclear weapons, cyber weapons, and space weapons?
I think it would be useful whether we have hard arms control, whether we have risk reduction or crisis management, or rules of responsible behavior, all of which are tools to promote predictability and stability in the international arena. I think it's good to be mindful, at least, of other things that may impact what may be negotiated at the time. Because you raise a good point of there are a number of things that's out there and a number of platforms, a number of environments. And, as we think about engaging countries, whether it's to legally binding agreements or whatever, it would be prudent to think about how another, whatever it's going to be, can impact the decision making or impact what we're trying to negotiate. Logistically, it's very challenging to say we're going to have something that includes a lot in an agreement, simply because the expertise, the time, all of that may mitigate against a comprehensive one, but certainly things can be drafted in a way that there's the acknowledgement of other types of threats or challenges that exist that may impact the decision, what's being negotiated, and put it in. And if you put it in there, recognize it, and if something happens 5 years later, there's something in the text that may have acknowledged that this other thing exists. So there may be ways to do it. That doesn't mean actually having an agreement that includes cyber and emerging tech, other types of emerging tech, and space and conventional, but there may be ways to draft something so that it acknowledges these other things that exist that we may want to figure out how they impact it.
Thank you for that. Gary Seymour,
Bonnie, to you again.
former National Security Council official, Obama administration, and now at Brandeis.
Former colleague of
Yes.
mine.
Yes.
So I have a question about verification of New START. We used to say that on-site inspection was essential, especially for counting warheads. You know, we count delivery systems with satellites, but the only way to count how many warheads is on-site inspection. It's been a long time now since we've had on-site inspections, first COVID, and now the Russians are refusing. So my concern is that at some point before 2026, before the treaty expires, I think there could very easily be questions raised about Russian compliance and whether they're uploading warheads beyond the 50 allowed to start. So can you tell us how confident we are that we're able to verify Russian compliance in the absence of on-site inspections?
I would say that we feel confident, but we would feel a lot more confident if you could have people running around and actually inspecting things. I mean, that's one of the, as you just noted, that's one of the advantages of having on-site inspection is that you can actually go and touch and look at and see for yourself. I think that without on-site, which is why we notify Congress of non-compliance with Russia, is because they weren't allowing inspections. So we know the value of it. And I think, it's hard to predict what will happen, but, we're watching everything very closely in terms of and paying a lot of attention to what's happening so that we can keep abreast of anything that may come out in the future that may be problematic for us in terms of Russia compliance. So at this point, we're hoping that either they'll come back into compliance or that they will certainly stick with the limits that they said they want to stick to underneath and not go above the limits of the treaty. But time will go on, and as you said, there may be Congress may cause challenges, or our own interagency may cause some challenges, simply because time will go by and we don't have those inspections. So it will create more of an issue for us the longer we go forward without some kind of inspections.
Can I ask a follow-up?
Yeah, sure.
I think the Russian decision to suspend their participation in the New START treaty is kind of strange because they're saying we're going to suspend, but we're going to continue to comply with the limits.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't quite figure out why they've done this. But I suspect that the Russians may actually believe that the on-site inspections were passing information on to the Ukrainians that they're using for targeting. At least that's what Putin said in his speech.
Mm-hmm.
So I fear that as long as, and of course the Ukrainians have attacked 2 of the air bases that we go to for on-site inspections. So I'm afraid as long as the war goes on and the Russians are nervous about, Ukraine targeting military assets in Russia, I'm not very optimistic that they're going to allow the inspections to resume.
Well, I would think that the war going on and everything that's happening with the war and their engagement with the war certainly was a factor in their decision making, especially when it comes to inspections. So, thank you.
All right, we have 3 questions over here and we'll come up there. So the gentleman at the back, you had your hand first, and then the gentleman in front of you, and then across the aisle. But let's take them one at a time, please. And if you'll tell us who you are.
Yes, Ambassador, thank you. I'm Jacob Trishina, Harvard Kennedy School student, 1-year mid-career Master's of Public Administration. And building on the previous question, if inspections do not occur for quite a while, for all this, the industry, the inspectors that works in here, and I ask this as an Army Foreign Area officer who has a lot of jobs at the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, I wonder what would be the future of all those organizations that check on compliance? Would there be a reorganization? Would be a shift towards other areas? Be curious to your insight. Thank you.
And if you don't mind passing the mic to the admin, thank you.
Well, yeah, I'm certainly one of the challenges when you don't have inspections is the individuals with the expertise to do inspections and mechanisms that provide and promote the inspections. I mean, the whole infrastructure. One of the challenges is what do you do with those individuals who know how to do those and who have experience in those, and it goes up and down the line in terms of everything that's involved in those inspections and all the people. So, there's always a possibility. I mean, people have to work. They got to do something. They're not going to sit around if there's no inspections. So naturally, there's they will be, and the infrastructure, whatever it is, part of that will be just thinking common sense. They'll probably be used for something, in the meantime, always thinking that the inspections will start again. I don't think we want to get to the point where we think they're not going to happen. So I think we want to maintain some expertise somehow I'm sure there's ways that we can do it, and I'm sure there's ways of doing it now to maintain that expertise so it doesn't go away completely, and logistics and all the other things that have to come into allowing these inspections to happen. But I wouldn't say atrophy so much. I would say just, I mean, some people may just leave because they're doing other things, but certainly we want to keep ourselves ready for when they happen again.
Okay, great. And you have the next one, and then you're going to pass the mic over to the gentleman just across from you. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Max Simon. I'm a Master in Public Policy student here. I also worked in the ABC Bureau over the summer. 3 of the greatest professional months of my life. So I thank you for hiring the person who hired the person who hired me. I'm still I guess I probably should just decide now what question to ask you because I have many. But I guess my question I guess one thing I grappled a lot with this summer is that the geopolitical winds don't really seem to be pushing toward strategic arms control anytime soon. It's not like an arms control zeitgeist, I guess. So I'm curious what you see as the role of ABC, ISN, PM. Is now sort of a time for everyone to put their heads down and try to conceptualize what like the future of arms control might look like from a technological perspective, different theaters, different regions, or is it there's some intrinsic value in just trying for the sake of showing that we want to put our best foot forward in the name of being minded toward risk reduction?
And may I suggest that not everyone knows in this room necessarily those acronyms.
Okay.
You know? So maybe they do, but.
Okay, I'll just be really brief. There's 3 bureaus that are part of my, there's 6 undersecretaries of state, and each one has a letter. Mine is T. And so when we say the T family, the T bureaus, those are 3 bureaus underneath T, which is me. The other bureaus letters like M and J and E, and I won't go into all those. Mine is named after the first undersecretary, William Tarr. So that's where the T comes from. I like the letter T.
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
I worked in the State Department.
there's so many myths about where it came from, but I was told that. So there's 3 bureaus. There's one when you mentioned arbor control verification and compliance, which my colleague Marina Snowden here is also. She's on my staff now. And that one, obviously, they lead the work on a New START treaty. They do conventional weapons issues. They do extended deterrence with South Korea, Japan, Australia. They also do all the work really on emerging technologies from the T perspective, and they're leading all the work on responsible behavior of emerging technology. So that's what I was talking about. The ISN Bureau, International Security and Non-Proliferation Bureau, they lead on the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Oh yeah, ABC also does Chemical Weapons Convention. Can't forget that. ISN does Biological Weapons Convention, Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. They do civ nuke work, getting countries off Russian nuclear energy. They do export controls. They do sanctions. They have a number of capacity building programs around the world on chemical, biological, nuclear security issues. They do nuclear security issues, and a host of other things. And then the PM Bureau, Political Military Affairs, does all of our security assistance, all of the equipment that goes to other countries. They authorize other equipment that DoD sends out. So all equipment that's going to Ukraine, they're authorizing all of that equipment. So they're working 24 hours a day right now. They also do all the work on landmines, destroying small arms, securing small arms, peacekeeping, and those are the 3 bureaus. So on this particular question, it's really just one bureau that's really involved the most on arms control, and that's the Arms Control Bureau. If you're talking about START, there's other arms control issues. There's the Chemical Weapons Convention, there's the Biological Weapons Convention. Those still exist. The Non-Proliferation Treaty still exists. So all of arms control is not going down the tubes because of New START. It's a big issue, obviously, but we still have other conventions that exist, others that are under threat, like the CFE Treaty, which is being challenged right now, Convention on Enforcing New York Treaty. But for all 3 bureaus, there's a lot going on that's changing the landscape. And I talked about this earlier today about how each one of those bureaus are dealing with new challenges because of Russia, because of the PRC, because of emerging tech, and a bunch of other things that are going on. So we don't have the luxury, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, not to do anything, because even while things are changing, we still have to deal with issues. So even while New START is not working right now in terms of suspension, we're still party to the treaty. So we still got to do what we need to do for that. Even though, it's just we're not in a position. In fact, it should be the other way around, because we're in these challenging times. This is when arms control matters the most. When you don't want countries just doing what they want to do. You want to control. You don't want countries, for example, saying, "Oh, there's a war now. I can start using chemical weapons," or "There's a war now. I can start using biological weapons." That's the last thing you want. You want countries to stay obligated to what they're supposed to be doing and not doing things and saying, "Well, it's a war, so that means nothing applies." So it's at these times that these things really do matter, and we have to think about what the next environment is going to look like. What's it going to look like after Russia? What's the future going to look like with the PRC with money for weapons? What's the future going to look like, in terms of emerging tech? We have real issues that we have to deal with. So they're actually working harder in terms of trying to deal with the present and trying to predict the future. So,
Great, thank you.
and thanks for working for us.
Yeah. You have the next question, and then we'll bring it up to the upper tier there. Yes.
I have a question two questions to the future of arms control. I'm a fellow at the Center for European Studies.
Right. Oh, I think it needs to be turned on, back on.
Thank you.
Great.
I'm a fellow at the Center for European Studies for 2 weeks, and when I'm back in Germany, I'll be again a member of the German Parliament for the Social Democratic Party. So thanks for having me here in this great institution. So thank you, Ambassador. I have 2 questions to the future of arms control. One is there maybe at the end of the war in Ukraine, is that a good time to think of doing something with the Russians again, or is that a bad time to do so? So if we're talking about security guarantees, could be that issue also part of it, or is that just a fantasy of a naive Western European, or is it maybe because you were skeptical of the future and the winds of arms control? I share that view, but maybe it's a good opportunity. Yeah? What's your opinion on that one? And the second one is, to me, the whole issues of arms control is more or less heritage of the Cold War between the Soviet Union and the United States. It's not all that, I know that, but it looks like a two-party thing, actually. With China now in the game, does that change fundamentally the rules of arms control? Is it what would you prefer? A bilateral one-on-one between the United States and Russia, and bilateral one-on-one between the United States and China, or should be something trilateral be the future of the deal? Is that too complicated?
And do you mind passing the mic right up to her? Thank you.
Timing to talk to the Russians. Well, one thing I can note on this is President Biden mentioned last year that we will re-engage with the Russians on the future of New START treaty after the treaty following New START treaty, once the Russians act in good faith. And so that's pretty much what's out there. Now we need to deal with them on New START, and that continues regardless of what's going on. The reason why we're pointing a finger at the Russians is because they're trying to suspend the treaty now, and they're legally obligated to the treaty now, and they were legally obligated to the treaty before they went into Ukraine. That doesn't change, and that's why they're suspending it, and we're saying we don't legally recognize your suspension because your legal obligation to the treaty remains, and so part of that is meeting with us under the auspices of that treaty. And the fact that they're not doing that is why we notified Congress that they were in violation, because they weren't doing it. So from our perspective, they do need to be continuing to fulfill their obligations like we have under the treaty. Now, future talks with them depends on when they act in good faith in terms of what happens after the treaty. But right now, we have an existing treaty that they need to continue to operate. On the second question of what do I prefer? Well, the reality of it is we have been working many years with Russia on START, different mini STARTs, whatever that is. So that's something that we have been doing for years. And so that's good to just continue that. We're starting to try to have something with the PRC, as you've heard, and had to have a discussion with them. They showed no interest in a trilat. I'm not necessarily sure a trilat would even work. I think there's different issues. I think there are things that we need to be thinking about separately and differently with the PRC. That's just my personal opinion. And we're talking about arms control with Russia. I'm not sure what the PRC wants to talk arms control. They may want to be talking about risk reduction, crisis management, which is also, arms control is on this side, rules of responsible behavior is on this side, and then you have everything in between, which includes crisis management, risk reduction. They may be more willing to talk about that. They may not be willing to talk about arms control. So I wouldn't want to put them in a room with us in Russia talking arms control, and that's not really what they want to talk about. So I think there are we have to think about what's going to work in each set, and I don't know if the China-U.S. discussions would make sense in our U.S.-Russia. But that, those are my thoughts.
Okay, you have the next question, and the mic's on, right?
Yeah, excellent.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ambassador. My name is Shanti. I'm a mid-career student doing the one-year Master in Public Administration at the Harvard Kennedy School. So I was wondering about your views on the threat posed by the Iranian nuclear program, and especially given the support to Russia and the ongoing war. So, and how best to navigate whatever Iran is doing.
We remain interested in coming to some. We still remain interested in JCPOA. Obviously, there's been lots of obstacles to come to that point and agree with them on that. And coming from meeting of the minds, it has been complicated, for example, by their own change of administration during the last couple of years. So, we still think diplomacy is the way forward. We still think that we can find a solution through diplomacy on the particular issue of JCPOA. We're just not there yet, and we haven't been able to find a way to come to some agreement.
Can you just add a footnote before you get to your question, just a footnote on that follow-up? Are we concerned about this? Reports are that there's 80% now of enriched uranium. I think, is it high as that?
Well, there's been some discrepancies on that. We recognize about 60% and that, but the 80% there's been some discrepancies about that one. So.
I've seen that. I don't know. I've seen that reported. I didn't know from your side. Yes, please.
Hello, Ambassador Jenkins. Thank you for taking the time to speak with us this afternoon. My name is Landon. I'm studying U.S.-China relations at the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences. And the question I have for you today is, so despite Russia's decision to withdraw from the New START Treaty, what concrete steps are being taken by the Biden administration to reduce America's number of nuclear weapons?
Well, a couple of things. So Russia did not withdraw; they just suspended. So they're still part of the treaty. We under the news. There's two things. We are still under, just like Russia. We have our limits that are put into the treaty, and the goal will be hopefully to continue these discussions in the future with Russia in terms of how we limit. But I can't say much about that because we're not in an environment. So one thing to keep in mind is the U.S. has reduced its nuclear weapons by about 88% since the Cold War. So we've gone down quite a bit in terms of our nuclear. And the nuclear posture review does highlight our continued interest in reducing nuclear weapons. So that remains a goal of ours in terms of what we want to do in the future. Of course, there's other things that are happening which complicates a lot of this. We talked about the PRC as well. But that continues to be the goal as noted in the nuclear posture review. and want to reduce our reliance on nuclear.
Carl Kaiser, over here, please.
I'm Carl Kaiser. I'm a fellow at the Project on Europe and Transatlantic Relations here at the Kennedy School. During the Cold War, the official contacts between governments were complemented by a multitude of informal networks of academics, of experts. The founder of the Belfer Center, for example, was a very important person. And the processes helped each other in a way because signals were passed on an informal level. It inspired the negotiations, etc. All of that lasted until a few years after the end of the war, is all dead. There is no communication. I have myself participated in lots of it. It's all over. We don't talk to the Russians anymore, the academics, the so-called experts. The Chinese, the dialogue with the Chinese is almost zero now, very little. And I'm wondering how you see that problem of the track 2 part of arms control, which is not only an American-Russian one, it's also the Europeans took part in it. For example, the confidence building measures, something to come back to the question of Ukraine. Perhaps after the end of the Ukraine war, that may be one of the things we have to do, confidence building measures, build up something like confidence, which just doesn't exist anymore. So how do you see now, at the moment when all of this is broken down, although some of us do read what they write, and what the former Russian colleagues write is really frightening. I mean, some of them are openly advocating the use of nuclear weapons. I mean, that used to be very different during the Cold War when there was a consensus that the community has to do everything to avoid a nuclear war. That seems to be different now. So it's not really a question. I'm just wondering how you see the interaction with the expert community as you do your work on arms control.
Well, I guess there's two answers. One, we do interact with the expert communities and NGOs and those. So that does happen. But on the track 2, I know there was some track 2 with Russians and with the Chinese, particularly before Russia invaded Ukraine. I think that complicated some of the track 2, obviously complicated a lot of the track 2 dialogue that was going on with Russia. I know there's interest, a lot of interest in engaging the PRC in track 2. I'm not aware of the success at this point of those engagements. I do believe there is, I know of some that people are trying to do, but I agree with you about the role of track 2 engagements and how important they are. And I'm hoping that, we will see more of that at some point in the future. But I do know there's entities now that do want to do that, even with the challenges that are going on. It's just very difficult when when Russia went into Ukraine, 2 of them that I am aware of had to end because it was just too difficult and challenging for their Russian counterparts to continue to engage in track 2. But they have an important role in all of this work, as you said. And we can learn from what is taking place in track 2 discussions.
Is there another question? If not, I have a question for you, and I don't know if Jacqueline does. But another question, some were surprised about this Chinese brokering of the deal, between Saudi Arabia and Iran. Are you concerned about that and what ramifications that might have for further discussions with Iran in this case?
No, I think what I can really just say on that one is, we generally, as a rule, are happy or seeing countries who can work together. And we don't want to necessarily intervene and say in any ways there's something really bad happening here. We we support more stability in the region. And so we just see what happens with that. But we generally want to see countries working things out. So,
Jacqueline, do you have a question? Because I have one last, and I think then we will wrap.
JJ, did you have?
I'm sorry. Okay, sure.
There are also some online.
So, there are
You're
some.
taking online questions? Okay.
Okay,
So
sorry.
there are a
I didn't
few.
realize that. Please.
What lessons can we learn from the Ukraine war for the nuclear security regime, in particular, in relation to nuclear security and conflict? One on China. So the P5 met in early February in Dubai under US leadership. Is that a forum that could be used to help get New START implementation back on track and perhaps further stimulate Chinese thinking about arms control? And one from somebody in Istanbul, Professor Mustafa Kibaroglu, who I think knows you, who says, it's nice to see you again. I'm proud to see you advancing in your excellent career. So his question is about US TAC nukes stationed in Turkey as part of the extended deterrence strategy of NATO since the Cold War years. He says he's been writing about this, gives us some links. He thinks that the weapons should be withdrawn from Turkey for two reasons. One, to be true to the rhetoric of Turkish top politicians suggesting their Middle Eastern neighbors to create an NWFZ in the region. And two, US nukes in Turkey have been used as a pretext to deploy Soviet nukes on Cuba and apparently to Belarus these days. What would you like to comment about my question?
Why don't we take those three, and if you bring the mic over, and we'll let you get yours then, okay?
Just on the issue of nuclear security and conflict, I think that this is probably referencing the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. I think everyone knows that the IAEA has been making a real effort to try to figure out how do we maintain safety and security at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in light of everything that's going on. The biggest problem here is the fundamental problem, obviously, is that Russia's in the plant, possessing the plant, going against international calls for them to leave the plant, give it back over to Ukraine control, to not risk safety and security through any military means or anything militarily at the plant. And of course we didn't recognize their annexation of the area in which it's located. So the fundamental issue is Russia's in there and they don't want to go. That's it. Despite international calls, IAEA resolutions, they still don't want to leave. So we also think that we have there are norms that exist. There are, there's the Convention on Physical Protection that exists. Grossi came out with his pillars, I think it was 7 pillars. There are things out there which can help correct behavior by Russia or any other country that wants to use it, wants to occupy or use a nuclear power plant in times of conflict. So we have what we need. We have the tools out there for Russia to do the right thing. They just don't want to. Here's my thought. It's a little dry. Mm-hmm. P5, yes. So the P5 are meeting at the expert level, and they're talking and they're doing some discussions on stability and some other issues. Whether this could be a way to help with New START. That's a P5 versus a bilateral arms control agreement. That they're not talking arms control in the P5 discussions. I don't know. I hate to say no to anything. I would just say I'm skeptical that could be used as a way for to deal with New START. And as I said, we're not talking about arms control in that environment. So it would be difficult in that environment for arms control in China particularly, but also on New START as well. First of all, hello, my colleague from Turkey who was also here at Belfer with me. I think we shared an office together. So hello, yes, small world. It's good to see him. I don't have a lot to say on this one. I mean, whether a pretext for Russian actions. I don't have a lot to say on this one. Actually, it's not something. I'm gonna punt on that one if you.
You're just gonna say hi.
Yeah.
Which is important. Yes, it is. It is. So we'll take your question, and I have a question that's not related to this area, just about you personally.
Okay.
So at the end, so go ahead.
Hi, thanks again for your willingness to answer another question. In some of the MTA seminars that we've had, the Managing the Atom seminars we've had, there's been a discussion about how to really properly deter Russian nuclear use in Ukraine. And there are a number of scenarios, plausible scenarios laid out for how they might choose to do so. And I understand that towards the beginning of the conflict, the Biden administration created a tiger team to try and address this issue and try to come up with contingencies should the Russians decide to use nuclear weapons. One thing I'm kind of unsure about is how we are viewing strategic clarity or ambiguity with respect to this issue. So I've heard, ish, that we've been communicating directly to them our intentions to respond in what way, given what kind of escalation. And while I understand you probably can't tell me what the nature of our response would be, can you tell us how it's being communicated to the Russians that we would respond? Like, is it a track 2 dialogue? Is this President Biden stating to Putin, we will respond? How clear are we being? How are we communicating?
Well, the basic way we communicate is through our statements and through our which they pay very close attention to everything we say. And just like we pay attention to everything they say. So, I think that we not only communicated through our statements on this, but also through our commitment to Ukraine, to our commitment to their sovereignty, and to the equipment that we're continuing to send them. I think that is that's a strong statement in itself in terms of how we see the situation, how we see the Russian invasion. So I think a lot of it is through these statements that we make, both verbal and nonverbal, in what we're doing.
Is there any direct communication? Like, is there leader to leader communication between the two?
I'm not aware of what the leader communication may be, but I can say that we still have open lines of communication.
Okay. Thanks.
It's not all like nothing at all.
My question is, as I said, not in this area, but we have a number of Kennedy School students in here, some who are graduating and they're going on. You've had such an incredible career and you're a Kennedy School grad. So what is your advice to them?
Well, I'm a Belfer.
Belfer, okay, sorry, Belfer. Well, still, it's still Kennedy School.
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
At least I view it.
No, I agree. Wow. One of the things I think is always so important is, for just knowing, and what I see in this room, what I've been here all day and talked to students, is the passion everyone has for what they're doing. I've heard some really amazing dissertation topics, pre-doc ideas. They're all very challenging. They're all interesting. They're all trying to find answers to some of that you all have asked some really good questions, trying to find answers to those questions. I see a passion here in the building with the students on these issues, trying to find answers in public service, commitment to public service, commitment to trying to make the world a better place. And I don't mean that sounding like, Pollyannish, but seriously, and that's one of the reasons why I've spent all my life in public service. is the dedication to find answers to big questions that will make it the world safer for everyone.
And making a difference.
And making a difference. And I see that in all the discussions I've had around the room here. And I would just say to continue with that and keep that passion and let that be what drives you in your decisions, in your commitment to what you do. And I have no doubt that all of you will, because I know the quality of the individuals who are here, and just the spirit of wanting to be a mover and a shaker, and that commitment I think is very important, and it's refreshing to see for those people like myself who've been in this field for 30 years, and I'm not yet beat down by it all, even despite what we're going through in 2023, 2022, 2021. I still have hope. You can't be in this field unless you see the glass half full, because if you did, you wouldn't do this. You'd be like, this is too depressing. But that spirit, that desire, whatever you're doing in this public service space, whether it's in arms control, or if even just something else like climate change, food security, human rights, or whatever one does in this public service space to make the world a better place, is why you're here. And the passion that I see to have that drive you in your decision making and looking for the opportunities, coming from this school and meeting the people that you're meeting and who will be people you will run into regularly in Washington River. That's what I would say. Just remember what your passion is and keep it.
Well, thank you for that. And Madam Secretary, you are indeed a mover, shaker, and shaker. So, and we've been very privileged to have you here today. Thank you for coming.